Thanks for joining me for another SONA Sessions where we explore conversations with remote team leaders about what's important to them in building strong remote teams. I'm Danielle Snelson, CEO of SONA Events, where we create in-person experiences for remote teams, helping you make meeting up in real life easy, whether it's an all-team offsite, retreat, or meetup. Joining me today is Sheba Lasley, CEO and founder of Total Success, a fractional HR and talent acquisition service to companies who understand that hiring the right talent is imperative to successful growth. So thanks for joining me today, Sheba.
Thanks for having me, Danielle.
Can
It's good to be
you,
here.
yes, can you tell us a little bit more about how you help and work with teams?
Of course. I typically work with growing companies to ensure that they're hiring the right people at the right time. But not only that, but also retaining individuals within the organization. And that's where the fractional HR piece comes in. Not only building a foundation, HR policies and compliance, but really ensuring that the talent that they have in-house is there for good, right, or for the long haul.
Yeah.
And then once they start hiring, what we will do is ensure that they're hiring the right people at the right time, coordinating with them in regard to their product roadmap or business roadmap, and ensure that they're hiring people at certain times and not over hiring just to end up firing later on.
That's a really important job and
Yeah,
takes a special partner to help you get that just right in your companies.
exactly.
Now, Sheba, I've had the pleasure of working with you in the past, and
Yes.
I love that we've had an experience together because one of the things that I always find fascinating is the
Mhm.
internal planning that
Yeah.
happens when you are working with your team to take them offsite. Now, especially like remote teams where everybody lives in different places and you're all meeting up for one location. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience when it comes to that role of internal planning and wrangling your team?
Yeah, definitely. In regard to me, I can tell you a little bit about working with a company during COVID. I worked for a remote first company. And of course, the team didn't meet in person during the height of the pandemic. But once restrictions were lifted, teams were able to meet about 2 to 4 times a year. And many of my colleagues were hired during COVID and were meeting for the very first time. So, as someone who had worked in HR, I helped coordinate these events and received direct feedback on the tremendous difference that they made from both leadership and employees. So even though our team functioned well remotely prior to meeting in person just expanded our dynamic and cohesiveness as an organization. And many of my colleagues had expressed gratitude for the impact that these meetings had on ensuring that we were all on the same page in regard to technical and product development. So
Mm.
overall, my experience has taught me that bringing remote teams together in real life is just extremely valuable investment in team cohesion and productivity.
I love it. Now, when you're organizing something like this, what was the best or most effective way for you to collect information, data, so that everybody felt comfortable? Everybody has a different preference or dietary restrictions or activities they like or don't like. Some people drink, some people don't. Like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so we do have an HRIS system, and what we did was I ensured that upon everybody onboarding, that they put those preferences in the internal HRIS system, such as dietary restrictions, shirt size, so that way we could have some of those things organized prior, not having to ask them. In regard to activities, just generally looked for activities that overall a majority of people would like, such as bowling or karaoke or going to a Dave and Buster's type of place where there's a multitude of games that someone can play. So those are the type of things that I would take into consideration when planning events. But then afterward, I would say I would gather feedback on surveys. So what did you like? What didn't you like? And that
Mm.
way we could just hone in on it for future events.
Yeah, so you're really tailoring everything
Hmm.
to what people are telling you so that it
Right.
just keeps getting better and better and better. And
Exactly.
I know in our experience too, the more we get to know people's preferences, it's easier to go find different things or unique things that then you're like,
Correct.
oh, okay, this is going to bring people together. We're going to have a cool experience together.
Exactly.
Along those same lines, maybe what's the biggest challenge to taking your team offsite, especially perhaps for people watching for their very first time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So taking a remote team offsite for the first time can be a logistical challenge, as we can imagine. And there are just several things to take into consideration. And in regard to accommodations, ensuring that it's essential that they're comfortable, appropriate for all team members, and in regard to the location, ensuring that it's centralized for the majority of the team. Budget is also something to think about in consideration. Um, but not only those logistical factors, it's also very important to think of the emotional aspect or challenges that may come with the first time meeting as a team. One of the biggest emotional challenges is building that trust and rapport. And when you've been remote for some time, your team may not have had the opportunities to get to know each other on a personal level. And this lack of personal interaction can make it a little bit difficult to build that trust and rapport when you're meeting for the first time. So you may feel some awkwardness during your first offsite, but ultimately these events can provide opportunities for team building and collaboration, which in time can be, both fun and productive. And you should see less awkwardness with each offsite event after that.
That feels really encouraging. I know that maybe traditionally, sometimes I run into a lot of remote teams where it's a 50-50 balance of introverts versus extroverts and,
Yeah.
social happy hours and dinners and all of this stuff is very overwhelming, especially if you're an introvert and have never met your team before. So
Yeah.
creating,
I
yeah,
Go ahead. No, please.
I'm just thinking about creating spaces and time for everyone and not
Yes.
just maybe your own personal personality because I could go 24/7 with people around.
Yes. And that's been some feedback too. So I'm more of an extrovert and I agree with you, right? So when I was planning some of these events, I would be like, hey, look, back to back to back to back. But you know what? Some of the feedback in the surveys that we conducted after events were, hey, can we get more spaces in between
Mm.
these events just so we can get some downtime? And then I realized, also making sure that it's indicated which events are mandatory and which are not. So that way people will have the option and not feel like, oh my goodness, if I do not go to this event, now that my job is in jeopardy. So I
Ah,
think specifying those key things is good.
yeah, that's a really good point. Making things optional or mandatory and
Yes,
allowing some freedom and flexibility in the schedule. How did
correct.
you find a balance within the schedules for your retreats and your offsites?
So what we would do is just ensuring that maybe not start too early or give enough time during lunch, maybe not, just so that people could get a breather, but definitely afterwards. I think that's where the most of the pain point would come is after you've been in a meeting all day and now you're expected to a degree to continue being with your coworkers. It could be a little, and then maybe that might be for 2 to 3 days on end, and that could be a bit draining for people. So just ensuring that maybe one mandatory dinner out of those two to
Mm.
three days, or kind of scheduling where the first day everybody doesn't have to come in so early, or there's that break time for breakfast and trying, it's not as soon as you guys come in, we're conducting this meeting. It's giving people breathers throughout the day, letting them be human. Because even when we're at home and working from home, or if we're in an office, we get up from our desks, we go out, we
Mm.
take a walk. We have those mini breaks that are just natural to us as human beings.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective to incorporate some of those, even just small moments of, like you just said,
Right.
like going for a quick walk or a 20-minute break here or whatever, just as we would do at home. My next question is for you having an HR background,
Mhm.
what would you, what's the shadow side like of offsites? Sometimes there's like HR things that happen on the back end. You don't have to tell me what those things are, but what's some things to look for, things to think about if, again, if this is maybe your first time going off site as an HR person managing a team of perhaps hundreds of people,
Hmm.
what would be going through your brain thinking through everything with the team?
As much as possible, making sure everybody is comfortable. I think that's the key thing. And I think that's a given, but maybe something that's often overlooked or looking at the majority, again, like you had mentioned, looking at your own personality and saying, oh, I could go all day and do this and be here and go there, but not giving that flexibility. Also, also giving people the option, there may be circumstances where they're not even able to come offsite. And
Mm.
what are the logistics for those that are not able to come off site? I've had that happen before, and for family reasons, personal reasons, they were not able to come to the off site, and making sure those accommodations are available for them.
That's a really good point. So, and what's, essentially defining the expectations of if you can't make it, we expect
Right.
you to tune in here,
Yes.
or maybe sometimes, if you have a large team, bringing them together, we find about 10% aren't able to come for this reason or that.
Hmm.
What's the expectation for them
Right.
if the purpose of our offsite is for team building?
Right.
I don't know if you have any advice around that.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, so if you're hiring, right, having the company set out what the agenda is for these offsites. And yes, here's Brody.
I love
And
it.
then yeah, and then in regard to setting that expectation, so when you're hiring individuals, they know and they can set this expectation. So yeah, they might not have been able to make this meeting, but if the company's expectation is that that they make these offsites, then just ensuring that it's communicated well in advance so
Mm.
that people, if you're hiring them, understand what the company's expectations are, or then internally understand what the expectations are with these offsites.
What do you think is a good time frame to inform the team of a date selection or when the retreat's happening or if there's a consistent time frame? How far in advance have you seen communicating that time frame to be useful?
I would say ideally anywhere between as soon as possible, but at the minimum 2 months beforehand. I
Okay.
think it's unreasonable to ask people to navigate their lives quickly if they're not used to coming in person less than 2 months.
Yeah. That's really helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
And for making all the other arrangements
Of
around
course. Yeah, I
who's
mean
coming.
getting hotels, reservations, flights, right? You're really it's a logistical nightmare if you are doing, as you could probably attest to, right? Like
Yeah.
less than 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. Well, as we wrap up, Sheba, what would be your number one piece of advice to somebody, whether it's the HR person or an executive assistant, whoever might be tasked with planning the internal side of planning their offsite? What would be like your last piece of advice for them?
Yeah, I would say definitely get help. I think when I was doing, I mean, very rarely is this someone's sole job to coordinate offsite or events within an organization. So if you're already doing your full time role and as HR and admin, very busy already, then if there's an opportunity to get help, I would say do that. When I was able to reach out to you and obtain that assistance, especially when was calling hotels and nobody was calling me back. I don't have time to chase that, right? And where you guys already had those connections and were able to get us a hotel block of rooms very quickly and understood that, I think it was a time saver. It was it just was so valuable that I would say anyone who had the opportunity would be to get help planning these events.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah, yeah,
But yes, we do understand how much time just having the right resources, connections,
yeah.
and planning behind the scenes is really helpful.
And
Sheba,
someone to think of those little things, those details. I just wanted to add that out. I mean, sometimes if you're not used to coordinating a large event. It's those little things that someone who's used to doing it may be able to help you with.
That's true. That's very true, and it can be very time consuming for all of those tiny little things. And I think that our teams love to personalize as much as possible, and they want to be able to do those small details and provide that
Hmm.
experience. But like you said, if you're working a full time job and then you're like
Yeah,
now tasked with this thing, you're like, yes, I have so many wants, but half of it's not going to happen. I don't have time for that.
very true. Very true.
Well, Sheba, how can somebody find you and connect with you after watching this?
Sure. So please definitely go to our website, www.totalsuccess.io. I'm on LinkedIn as Sheba Lasley as well. You can reach out to me there. And those are the two best ways to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll be sharing that here on the screen. And I just want to say thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for more upcoming SONA sessions. Thank you so much.